Welcome to the BXG Podcast, the podcast where pop culture and nerd culture meet.
You think it's just going to be barbecue sauce?
Because if you actually read those books, it's just gobbledygook.
I really think clothes should be mandatory.
Speaking of Star Wars,
Cassian,
trailer reaction video. Andor. And what are you drawing up plays there?
I'm filling out my ballot.
Oh, okay. Andor, episode 9, kind of a split episode. Bix is being interrogated by Deidre Marrow for information on the whereabouts of both the buyer, who we know obviously as Luthen, and Cassian Andor. And they're using a very interesting type of interrogation technique where they play like the sounds of a dying creature, and it just makes you go insane. So that's cool.
That was cool. Yeah, agree.
Meanwhile, nobody's listening.
Nobody's listening. It's the name of the episode.
Yes, it is. And no one is listening to the prisoners, and there's a situation on level 2. And we learn towards the end of the episode where the old gentleman who is working on the work crew with Andor strokes out, and they call a medic, and they're just like, well, we're just going to put you down like a dog, basically.
Yeah. Right.
And they learn that no one's being released.
I can't help anyone.
They're recycling prisoners. You get released off level 4, you get sent back to level 2. And so now we are Andy Serkis, his character, as well as the rest of the team in this prison block, are ready to make their escape. Meanwhile, some shit happens with Mon Mothma. Who cares?
Right.
So, yeah. Hers is easily the most boring storyline of the show. And I will say that this episode was probably the least like gripping to me so far.
Yeah. I would say, I've talked about the show being really, really good, and probably my favorite show of like the 3 that we have really dug into lately. The show definitely wasn't as gripping. It was also a shorter episode. It's almost like they knew that it wasn't going to be that good, in like the grand scheme. So like, let's keep it short. We need to build the storyline a little bit. And they did build the storyline. We realized the recycling, like you said, which I think is important. It was building towards that. And I just went out of the episode with it. So, the writing's still really good with the show, even when the show is boring. Like, this show I wouldn't say the show was boring, but it just wasn't that thrilling.
Yeah, it was a big time setup episode.
Yeah, it was a big time setup episode, but like, I still like this show a lot. Because I feel like the writers just know what they're doing. It feels way. I saw a thing with The Ringer today where like Andor was the show that we thought like Game of Thrones and their House of Dragons and Power of the Rings was supposed to be, where it's like good setup to like good prequels to something. And like, this is a good prequel to something because it is building up all this energy. The show is still anxiety inducing. Like, there still is that, like, you're sort of on your edge caring about things like that. This one is just that build. So, not, every kind of show like this is going to have a building episode where it's just not that interesting, but things are still happening. It's just a slower happening. And I think that was just this. It's hard to say like, oh, this episode wasn't good. It's just, it is what it really, this is the episode that like we didn't necessarily want. It's the episode we needed to build towards where we're going.
And this is the Ringer headline: Andor, the Empire is scarier without Sith Lords and super weapons by avoiding Darth Vader, the Death Star, and the dark side of the Force. Andor has
good article. It's a very good article.
Disturbing banality of the Empire's evil. And that's the thing that I've said from the beginning was we want to see what makes the Empire bad, what makes them insidious, what makes them, evil. And this show has delivered on that, giving people sentences for being a tourist up to 6 years and then sending them to work camps where they're not actually being released and they're working these 12-hour shifts and being worked like dogs and all this. and using torture methods and, setting up garrisons and taking people's religious freedom. Like this is what you want to see when you're having a show that is, a political thriller. And I do think that yes, this is a Star Wars show. Yes, that there are laser blasters. Yes, there have been TIE fighters. There are droids. But this show is a political thriller. In the same vein as something like Jack Ryan or Tom Clancy stuff. When Jack Ryan is a Tom Clancy thing, but I can't say enough good things about it. Yes, this episode was a little bit slower, but I do think it's building. It's just I'm curious to see with 3 episodes left where this ends up at, because I do believe they're going to prison break in this next episode. And then I think that there's going to be some type of shootout or battle or whatever on his homeworld, because they are using his mom as bait. And we also know that some of these other characters, these second and tertiary characters, we had one of the characters that was in on the heist with him. We learned that she is the cousin of Mon Mothma. And so that's like a nice little twist and wrinkle. And those characters are trying to bring her in more to the violent side of the rebellion, where it seems like she's really trying to fund things or use her political clout, but you can see it failing as every time she takes the stage in the Senate, people are just not paying attention. They click their lights out. They're not paying attention to her. And so, you can kind of see that where she's going to get drawn into the more violent aspects of this. But I think this is a nice, dark, gritty take on Star Wars.
Yeah.
And it's, I haven't read the article from The Ringer yet, but I do agree that the Empire is scarier and evil without Sith Lords, without Darth Vader, without the Death Star. And part of the reason is because that shit is cool. Like Darth Vader's cool. You know what I mean? So
you dress up as Darth Vader for Halloween.
Right. Like Darth Maul is cool looking. Kylo Ren is cool looking. So like the bad guys in Star Wars, even though they're the bad guys, there's something like mysterious about them and intriguing about them and cool about them. Whereas this is just showing, and again, we've drawn the parallels to Nazi Germany, Russia, other, fascist regimes and stuff like that. But this is drawing those parallels to the scary things that are in our world right now, because a lot of the things that are happening in this show aren't too dissimilar from some of the things that are happening in some of the seedier parts of the world.
Right.
And so I do think that the show should be praised not only for what it is as a Star Wars show, but also I think that they're doing better social commentary without maybe even necessarily trying to than She-Hulk, for example, did. And they were trying very hard to.
Trying very hard, yeah. I agree. I mean, it's hard to say, like, what's my favorite show this year? This show, I will say, we had pretty high expectations for this. I think we both were like, this looks cool. Exceeded my expectations far and wide. It's way better than I thought. It's just so well written. It's like, that's the thing I normally care about with shows. It's like, we started watching the second season of White Lotus, and the first season of White Lotus was great. Second season, the first episode just didn't hit me as hard as I wanted it to, and it makes me a little concerned about like where they're going with the writing, if they even really plan on doing something like that. But the show like this, it's just like the writing is so perfect. Like there's not a missed line. I think that's the thing with this that really sets it apart. And you don't watch Succession, right, Brendan?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
That's the best show. That is the best show on television. Like that currently has like seasons to happen or seasons planned. and that's because the writing is so good. And that's, Breaking Bad, the writing was so perfect on that show, Mad Men, things like that, The Wire. And this show is doing that same kind of thing. And like, I hope that it gets recognized.
Yeah.
Because I know it says Star Wars. And I know it's Star Wars related, but this is a show that isn't, I would say, like, it's not your younger self Star Wars. It's not those
Right.
3 movies that came out, just recently that weren't, high quality.
Mhm.
This is someone who cares about this franchise and wants to make it seem respectable, and that's what I love about this show, because it's so. This might be like, I don't want to say this, like, this would be the worst episode of this season, and it's still better than most other things that happen on television.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I do I do expect in the next week or two for business to pick up, and hopefully we go out.
It's gonna be
season 1 on a high note here.
100%.
So we will move on